Hey everybody, welcome back to Remotely Serious. I'm here with Sondre Rasch, the CEO and co-founder of SafetyWing. We were getting into a really exciting discussion right before we turned the mics on. So I was getting my trigger finger was happy. I was just getting excited to turn that record button on. So yeah, welcome, Sondre. Welcome to the podcast. We were talking about Plumia, an initiative that falls under the umbrella of SafetyWing, but we're glad to have you here representing both SafetyWing and Plumia on the podcast.
Thank you, Curtis. It's great to be on Remotely Serious.
Yeah. Well, it's a good introduction. I'll just use what we were talking about as a segue. Earlier this year, it was not the first time that I heard about SafetyWing, but I participated in a Discord-based cohort of an initiative called Plumia. And so there's two things that, are really interesting to talk about in terms of the organization you run. Plumia actually has come up probably more often on this podcast because we like to get into nerdy things. And if I can do a quick version, probably not the best version of pitching your company, and then I'll hand it over to you to do even better. SafetyWing is a global health insurance company for remote workers, remote teams, and digital nomads. Normal health insurance isn't really the right kind of product for people that are remotely working. The industry hasn't adapted. So SafetyWing is a venture-backed company that handles that. But you also have a fairly niche but famous initiative within the future of work, within the sovereign individual space, within the kind of maybe even sort of within the crypto and blockchain community, because it kind of is adjacent to some of the things that go on there. You have Plumia, which has a long-term vision for almost a new way of governance and understanding the nation state. So is that close enough to how you might pitch it to your stakeholders?
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting and good. And I don't think I need to correct. It's not exactly the words I would use, but I think it's pretty accurate and good.
So maybe the thing I'm curious about both of SafetyWing and Plumia, but maybe the first thing is your core product. It almost seems like a magic wand. And I sold into U.S. healthcare. A company that I had an exit with sold to risk-bearing payers and U.S. companies, and sold basically a diabetes coaching and monitoring product. So I understand what it's like to sell to for-profit health insurers. I know the kind of people that are the types of executives that work at health insurance companies. And I do have, half a decade of experience with the health insurance company mindset, mostly in the US. So when I look at this, it almost seems like I know what the premiums are on health insurance in the US. That's a unique case because other countries and other nations, most of them or many of them have government healthcare. But it seems like, okay, yeah, how do you deliver a product that's going to give you health insurance all around the world? And it's also not just a thin layer of emergency travel insurance. It's real health insurance. Oh yeah, what would the premiums on that be? Oh, I don't know, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month. But that's not what you offer. You offer something that's very reasonably priced. And so how do you do that? What is the magic and the product of SafetyWing? And I'm not trying to be PR for your company. I'm just genuinely curious. How do you do it?
It's very hard for me to step outside of the kind of tree of knowledge curse, of not understanding the kind of stems and the branches of the things, because I'm so in this world day to day. But I'm going to try to do my best as I try to explain that. So I'm just you just stop me when something doesn't make sense at all.
I will. I'll interrupt if I get
Yeah.
confused.
If someone's listening and they're like, I want to start a company like this. This is the kind of problems you got to solve. Okay. So one is this regulatory problem. So here we took a strategy choice early on. We're not escaping the nation state out of the gate. We're more trying to build this bridge, right? So we're not building this on the blockchain. We're getting normal insurance company licenses, having a friendly cooperative approach with existing states and regulators. Okay, and in insurance, that means everything is super regulated, and that becomes the biggest problem you have to solve out of the gate. It's regulated on multiple levels. To have a carrier, to have a product, to sell insurance, every country. Okay, top problem you got to solve out of the gate. There's a couple of ways to solve it, but anyway, that's That's
Can I just ask a quick question on that?
yeah,
Because you need to set up certain things, it's not like a D2C SaaS AI app or something where you can validate $1 of revenue on day one. What was the time from having the idea or co-founding the company to when you were legally allowed to earn your first dollar of revenue? Was that like 6 months or was it 2 years to kind of get from we want to do this,
yeah.
we have to get certified and then, we made our first dollar.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we were actually really fast about it. So the average for people starting an insurance startup is 2 years. We did it in 6 months. I didn't know it was fast at the time, but I'll tell you the trick. I remember we sat down day one. We didn't come from that industry, so I just used my general startup method, which is generate many attempts and try all of them in parallels. We wrote down 70 different ways, and one of them worked. So it's just 6 months, but we didn't get our carrier license. We just got that this year, but we were able to find essentially another international company that had somewhat products that was not, just a step away, and we essentially pitched them our product vision. And using their kind of existing regulatory licenses, we can construct our new product, and that was sort of how we got to market pretty fast.
So,
Uh,
like a fintech company might find a place where Visa or MasterCard will let them partner. In a sense, it's like you found the right partner to launch a insure tech company quickly because you didn't build everything from scratch. You were able to find the right partner after
and then you
discarding 69 other ways of trying, and this is the right way.
correct, and then you build the infrastructure as you after as you go along,
Yeah.
but at least you're generating revenue, you're working on the top problem you got to solve first, which is getting customers, making something people want. Okay, so that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is this thing. uh, you could describe it in multiple ways, but it's essentially like people will in the US will tend to think of it as the medical network, but that's really only the way it is described in the US because the medical networks here, are so well developed. But it's essentially like using the insurance product, right? It's using the
Mhm.
product, and so there's something that's available out of the gate anywhere, which people in the US will recognize as out of network, which is essentially that you charge and get your money back after. Or in our case, we can also do one better for anything expensive, where we essentially get the medical provider to bill us directly. And then over time, you build up this, increasing network of hospitals who know you and will always kind of bill you directly. We're working on one like super hack right now, which is, we're making this like SafetyWing card so that you can just use that to pay anywhere. So even if it's a hospital not in our network, you can still pay. So with our product, you can go anywhere, but not everywhere in the world they will accept to bill us directly. So
Mhm.
if you call us, right, we will of course refer you to somewhere that will bill us directly. So that's the kind of two-way it works. The process of solving this is this like combination of sort of managing a little medical network plus just a variant of kind of customer service. I guess it's not that hard, and it's an industry in insurance. It's called third party provider, which is super nondescript name, but that's like the name for the industry. It's essentially the people doing this sort of claims management for insurance companies. Okay, that's another piece of the puzzle. And then the third piece of the puzzle is just like making the user experience great. And frankly, this is where we poured a lot of our energy in the beginning. So in health insurance, buying it, whether you're a company or an individual, is just so opaque. There's like you kind of have to be a financial engineer. It took us years to understand all of it ourselves, that they're just expecting buyers to understand, which is why you need this kind of broker layer who charges exorbitant fees, like from like 50, and some like life insurance is like 90%. Like they really like get a large piece of the pie. So the way around that is just simplification. So we said, oh, we wanted to have one price for everyone worldwide on the website. And that's a huge effort. That was like the hugest simplification effort we did, because then you need the same policy, works everywhere for everyone. And it's right now it's $45 a month for the Nomad insurance product, and for the Nomad Health is either 120 or 240 for this like very premium, all the add-ons in. So that's the other part, and the work of doing that is very hard. It's like grinding. It's like you gotta negotiate with the regulator and like simplify the language. You have to kind of like negotiate with sort of an actuary to say like, hey, but listen, like if we cut off this option, then we have a product where we don't have to price it variably, and so like you got to make a lot of sacrifices to get to simplicity. It's kind of like going, what was the phone before the iPhone that was
It
very
was a BlackBerry.
BlackBerry, right? It's kind of like
Yeah.
going from the BlackBerry to the iPhone. I suspect before then that people who were making the BlackBerry were like for simplification, and they were like struggling. Oh, can we delete this button, right? And they're like, no,
Yeah.
not really, we need that button. And
Yeah.
then Apple just comes out and it's like it's just one
No,
button.
no buttons. Yeah.
It's just no
One
button,
one button. One button. Yeah.
one of them. So that's a similar kind of thing where it's like our approach is radically different from what everyone else is doing, and just simplifying the user experience. You can sign up in 5 minutes. It's the same product for everyone. The price is on the front page. That's a big part of the kind of product development puzzle for us.
What nationality made up your first cohorts of customers the most? Did it appeal? We know that it appeals to people that are working remotely and digital nomads and remote teams as sort of a demographic. But did you find that a certain nationality, Americans more than others or Europeans more than others, was the first to get it and want your product in the earlier days?
So people's intuition, whenever we talked about nomad insurance and indeed nomad health and remote health, when that came out, it was something like this, and it's kind of there's truth to it, but it's so much less true than people expect it to be, and that is that roughly nobody in Europe is going to want this, and maybe also nobody in any other country that has public health systems, and then there will be like 7 countries where they do want it, where they associate with private healthcare. Maybe they think about Singapore, United States, maybe a couple of the Latin American countries, and something like that. And then you're also going to have this like business process outsourcing
Mhm.
use case. That's sort of like people's assumptions when we first started pitching it, and um, and that isn't true at all. What you get is Europe is a big market for us, like 34%. The US is too, but also rest of the world is also significant. So it's surprisingly not geographic. What we see is, there's host country and then there's destination, right? So it's like
Mhm.
somebody has a home country, like their passport country, uh, and that is distributed, kind of like what I said on on the individual front, on the nomad front. But then we also see very clear patterns on destination. On
Mhm.
basically, just go to nomadlist.com and like just see that ranking, and that's
Yeah.
how our customers distribute as well. It's extremely uh, uh, concentrated on nomad hotspots. So right now you can imagine, Lisbon is off the charts. Bali's been there for forever. Chiang Mai been there forever. uh, yeah, so
Right.
that's some
So
pattern.
it's not necessarily about the nationality of the person. Maybe there are some patterns there, but it's about where they are. And there's lots of people from Europe and Canada and America and all kinds of different countries going to nomad hotspots and saying, "I need health insurance there." This is the brand that makes sense to me, because I think, I guess maybe my experience as a buyer is that, and this might be a regulatory thing. I think it actually is a regulatory thing. I'm in Canada. If I want to go to Mexico, they're very particular about saying, you have to tell us about the trip beforehand. It's much better to buy the insurance. This is just in the Canadian provincial context. Tell us about the trip beforehand. You might not get
Mhm.
coverage if you land in Mexico and then buy it afterwards. So it's kind of a piece of hygiene, something your dad tells you to do, which is buy the insurance before you leave. Don't forget. Is your flow set up where that's true? It seems like where you're going, nomads don't think of themselves as at home and on vacation. They might think of themselves as in a continuous line. Are you able to provide that kind of buy at any time,
Yeah.
anywhere type of experience?
Yeah. This was, we were nomads when we made the product, and so we knew exactly those pain points. That's the key difference between sort of, if I were to call, nomad insurance a separate category, nomad insurance and travel insurance is you can buy it whenever, so you can buy it when you're abroad, and it's a subscription
Right.
that you can have without end. Uh, that's broadly, that's the key difference. That's the key kind of difference between a nomad and a traveler is this thing. It's open ended. It might last for years, and you might indeed get it when you're already abroad because you're not going on a vacation.
And so, not to get too morbid, but health insurance, I think it's something that people, they never want to have to use. It means that you've had some kind of, in most cases, it means you've had some kind of health event. Although there are other things that are just part of the normal course of life, getting prescriptions refilled, getting glasses, where it's not so much an acute event. I wonder if this is something. There's a perception where young people are nomads, and so they're buying this product, and maybe not much happens to them when they're in Bali or in Lisbon. But it's great to, you should have health insurance. It's great to have health insurance. It's the right thing to do. Do you find that you also have to plan for, there may be a category, just knowing what I know from actuarial science and the US market,
Mhm.
someone who is a nomad in the UK, and it turns out, God forbid, thoughts and prayers, we don't actually want this, but they have very complicated heart disease and type 2 diabetes, or they have stage 3 pancreatic cancer. And all of a sudden, as is the nature of the health insurance industry, you're responsible. Are you then, most emergency travel insurance would send someone home, if they're vacationing in the UK, okay, great. Go back home to Vancouver or Chicago, and you definitely won't deal with your cancer or your diabetes surgery here. Are you, is it such that if someone's in the
Mhm.
UK or Indonesia or Portugal, they then, if they're living there for several years, they can go to the NHS, they can go into the Portuguese healthcare system and get complicated treatments. That's the thing that's kind of like, oh, I get it. Yeah, you nomad for 6 months, you get insurance. That makes
Right.
sense. $80 a
Yeah.
month, $200 a month, $50 a month, whatever it
Right.
is. Then it's like, how do
Yeah.
you deal with that? And that's kind of a lead in into the concept of a social safety net in Plumia. But I wanted to just
Yeah.
deal with that kind of tricky topic first.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. It's funny because when people buy this product, they imagine themselves just like going to the urgent care for something minor as like the main use case. But yeah, if you think about like what we actually deal with that is expensive and difficult, and where the users desperately need our help, and we make a huge difference, and is in those cases. It is in emergencies, it is in the big serious stuff. And so, uh, no, we don't send home. I mean, just to start there, right? So even a nomad insurance, right, the sort of the lowest cost, nomad insurance option, you have a new diabetes thing happening. You're just doing the treatment there. And you're not being sent home. It's not like most of those travel insurances don't actually cover health, right? They just might cover some to go to the emergency room and then trip home essentially. So it's not like that. Like you don't have to have a primary health insurance anywhere. Um, there are limitations on nomad insurance though, which is worth mentioning, and there are two, and one of them is long-term cancer treatment. So that's not covered on the $45 one. But if you have Nomad Health, that's also like that's just covers everything. Nomad Health covers everything, including, you're in the UK, you're just staying there doing long-term cancer treatment for a decade. That's still covered. Covers all the expenses. So it is a zero deductible, high quality health insurance that covers everything. That's what it's set up to do now, and certainly in the future.
The current vision, and it seems like you're definitely hitting a version of your current and near term vision. I've been in startups. Many startups are encouraged to have a long-term vision, whether that's to raise venture capital. There's a growing movement right now around just sort of ship quickly and be a solopreneur and an indie maker, and that's great. And I think that that's a wonderful movement. But traditionally, for startup founders who want to impress VCs and raise money and raise more money, startup founders are encouraged to have a bombastic, amazing 7 to 10 year vision. And many do. Many say they do in order to get that round closed and all kinds of things like that. But you're kind of a unique case where you do have a long-term vision, but it's not necessarily something you just sort of privately say to your Series C or Series D investor. It's a formal, there's an aspect of your long-term vision. I'm not going to say it's your whole long-term vision. There's an aspect of your long-term vision that is a formal entity called Plumia that aims to push society forward on various fronts, like the creation. One of them is the creation of a passport that's not tied to a nation state. I know that there are other aspects. We were mentioning off mic before we started that I participated in a cohort that was on Discord around brainstorming and thinking of, open source initiatives for Plumia, it seems to be structured as either nonprofit or open source, or not under the same profit pressures of SafetyWing. What's the deal with that? If people say just focus, if you're in a startup, just focus on revenue, bigger, don't get distracted by other things. This seems like it's quite siloed off. It's different. It's not necessarily a profit center for many years. What is Plumia? And for listeners, that's Plumia. What is Plumia, and why did you launch that so early in the game, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we formed SafetyWing day one. It has this mission of building country on the internet and a global social safety net. And there are many takes you can take on that reasoning. One is the way I think about it, which doesn't make much sense to others for some reason, but it's essentially that the social structure reflects the reality that you're in. Like if you're on the moon, like Paul Graham has this line, like if you were on the moon, air would be like a product. So what kind of social structures you have, it depends on just the reality that you find yourself in. And the internet has changed the constraints of the reality that we live in, and the social structures have not caught up. So, from my point of view, it is obvious that these kind of internet global social structures will emerge. And you can call this internet countries, you can call it other things. I don't know exactly how it will manifest, but to me, it's obvious that's on the horizon. It's exciting. That's a cool part of the upcoming decade. And but I can also see this kind of going kind of batty in some ways. Like you can get kind of dystopian, accidental social structures here. Um, we're set out to make global social safety. And when we first started, we thought like you imply that we would essentially complete the health insurance, make that great. All the other, the global social safety net parts, retirement, etc. And then at the end of that chain, we would start the citizenship thing. What essentially accelerated that timeline was COVID. So what we saw in COVID is, hey, remote work is accelerating the future that we foresee by like 5 years. And we know that every sort of project like this has this like long lead time. So we should just start the final goal right now. And that became Plumia. Plumia. We invited a lot of interesting thinkers in a founding meeting, and Lauren Razavi took over, and you met Chance and just the community there, and by the way, had amazing success already. A lot of it due to the nomad and remote work visas, and it's not that they're like ours, but we kind of got a bit due to a fortunate sequence of events. We, from a many countries' point of view, we are sort of like the host of that idea. So I'll explain how that happened. Like, it primarily happened with Sarah. I remember hosting a talk on Web Summit, arguing for this idea in 2019. This guy from Barbados heard about that, and I had him on my podcast, and then he proposed that in 2020 at a very fortunate timing, and then, as you know, like 80 countries copied this very similar thing, and and uh, and we were even like at the UN speaking, for the General Assembly last spring about it. We're in like dialogue with 30 countries about like organizing something called the Nomad Border Pass. Apply one place, get 30 visas, as a way to this sort of global citizenship route. Okay, so I think we were very good and right. I also think that this is still ahead of us, but this sort of global citizenship, or whatever you could say it, like internet social structures, is ahead of us. Internet country, however you want to define it. Um, the timing is still still not perfectly there, but at some point, it's in very soon in the future. I think this will be like a major industry, like kind of AI or crypto. Like it's a whole bucket of things, and that's also why we were hoping with Plumia, and what you were part of in the core, is that we we can't do it alone anyway. So we need to kind of be this hub that kind of gathers and activates other projects in this realm. And of course, there are tons of other cool projects. It's not like we are doing it alone. Like in crypto in particular, there's tons of super interesting projects. We're paying attention to them. We're super supportive of them. Um, and where we're unique is in that way I mentioned in the beginning. It's this strategy of being kind of more friendly to the existing order and kind of providing this bridge for the countries themselves. Best exemplified with this nomad visa situation.
So maybe to be really clear, when we're talking about a social safety net, in my word, these are my words, not yours, but I've looked at it and seen it as something like we haven't had much innovation in the concept of the nation state as created by philosophers in the 1600s and 1700s, and kind of in the post 1600s world. First, France and America, got rid of kingdoms and started to, it took hundreds of years, but there became modern, liberal, capitalist nation state democracies. And then there were still, fascists and things like that. And then eventually by the 1960s, the colonialism around the world started to break away, and we got to the end of the 20th century with the, not every country, but most countries have a certain model. And that model is that, there's some educating the children, taxing the workers, and taking care of old people. And that for the first time, or in
Mm.
the coming decades, we may find other entities in the new internet context where it's not necessarily the land-based post-Westphalia nation state that educates you, provides your income, and then your pension or social security or whatever you call it, but some other kind of entity, like maybe in Plumia's vision. So I actually have, I
Mhm.
kind of have, I've always, I'm excited to ask you about this because I've always had kind of two hangups about this, or just two things that I'm trying to get my head around. And the first one is, so I won't talk single out Plumia, but I'll talk about, there's another project called Praxis, and essentially wants to create a city in the
Yeah.
Mediterranean that is a new governance. Of course, they'll have to partner with, they're keeping it very secret, but they'll have to partner with Croatia or Montenegro or Albania or wherever they're doing it at first. Similarly, there's another project in Honduras called Prospera, which partners and creates a special economic zone to run these new city, the first versions of these city experiments. What I think is
Yeah.
that, of course, there's a lot of optimism when you say it. Like, I'm a, not me, but like I'm a 28-year-old nomad and I want to just be able to go to a new kind of governance or have a new kind of passport. And it's just like a good person who's one of the good people. They don't commit crimes. They just want to travel. That all sounds great. It's like provide
Mhm.
a passport that gets you into eight countries. But what I don't get is, like, imagine you create the city where everybody's like-minded. We're all on the blockchain. We all have similar
Mhm.
values. Unfortunately, what I know about social science and people and society is, like, at some point someone will murder someone. Someone will commit white collar crime
Mhm.
on the territory or in the jurisdiction of this new governance. And it seems like the whole point of nation states, the ugly truth, is that there are multi-hundred-year-old legal systems, civil society, police officers,
Mhm.
firefighters, and I don't hear about that so much when and so I'm not even asking about Plumia. I'm just observing some of the other projects, and it's like, this is
Yeah.
great that you all use Ethereum, and you have libertarian tax
Mhm.
brackets, and you can share values, etc. But like, what happens when there's a bombing? Like, nations have to deal with real shit,
Right.
and some of these places, I don't get how they're going to deal with that. I'm not saying that they don't have a plan, but that's sort of like
Yeah.
point one. Um, so, and the other
Mhm.
point is kind of, it's more on taxation. So point two, if I'm indulging myself a little bit,
Mhm.
is I see nomads saying, it's annoying to have to pay tax. I'm only there for 6 weeks. I want to go here. I want to go there. There's a group of libertarian nomads that are explicitly saying, I am trying to get to 0% tax. And it feels like, if
Mhm.
if the world just creates some loophole where you can go to six different countries, never be in a residence somewhere, that doesn't seem like something the existing nation states would be totally okay with. Billionaires are smart, and if we create a system where you can just sort of exit, like, we're already dealing with that, but I feel like nomads are sometimes too optimistic about, like, isn't taxation annoying? And I'm not saying that's what Plumia thinks. I'm not saying that's what you think, but those two things, like crime and bad things happening, and armies and navies and police officers, I don't hear much about that in these special new network state cities. What happens there? And then taxation's another one. So I'm just laying it out, the two things that I'm like, those seem like huge problems.
Yeah. Great, and I also love the way you described things. You know, the problem solution space in the beginning there. It's fantastic. So okay, so bad shit happening. I guess to start with, you know, while adjacent intellectually, you know, there is a difference in the kind of problems. Let's say internet citizenship and Prospera, you know, has to deal with, because we're not holding any land, right? And we also have this like huge benefit which nation states really don't have. They could take this back, but in modern times they're kind of reluctant to banish people, which is that we could just say, well, you can't be a member
Yeah.
anymore. So, you know, so it's kind of like an easy fix. And you know, other than that, you know, we're a layer on top of, and will be for a long time, layer on top of various geographies being ruled by anything from like modern liberal democracies to like, you know, less developed situations. And that's just the way it is, right? So that's just what, you know,
Hmm.
the future will be like for a while. I do think that, you know, like when we, you know, in that, you know, nation state scenario, you know, when we went from city states to nation states, you know, that was technologically driven. You know, eventually the higher layer does, you know, get more and more say, even though the city government, you know, still exists and there is a distribution of tasks
Hmm.
between them. I do suspect that it will go in a similar way, similar direction here, which I think is very good, because it brings with us, you know, reduction in. I think it can reduce conflict over time. Yeah, so that's roughly like for SafetyWing. It's easier. Like we don't have a lot of the shit you're thinking about. We're not Prospera will have to deal with, but we don't have to, and we have a tool that they
Hmm.
don't, which is to you just cancel your membership.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. You don't have to forcibly extradite someone from a piece of
no,
land,
no, it's
essentially.
like a digital thing. Okay, so that's one. But as for them, I haven't thought enough about it. I would agree with you, right? So it's like if you look at historically, you know, there's Hong Kong, but Hong Kong existed because UK protection, and then there's Singapore, who kind of self was a bit of a self-made country, but you know that's like 5% of GDP in military, and like just being completely paranoid about their own security, you know, in the early decades.
Hmm.
So uh, it's one of those two, right? I mean, if you see Paul Romer, Charter City, they're all looking at Hong Kong. They're all saying host, like basically, you know, protective country. They want to be under some other orders protection, at least in the beginning. That seems
Yeah.
to be their plan, because going the Singapore way is just very expensive. Um, so yeah, I'm very glad these projects exist, because I do think we need competition in governance, and that they will introduce this. And but yeah, I'm also glad I don't have to solve that problem. So good luck to
Yeah.
them. Number two, can you remind me, the question was the taxation?
Yeah. It's taxation, and so like very briefly, I'll try and reframe it from the way I said it first. I see nomads. There's two different groups. One group of nomads is kind of like, it's annoying to fill out forms. I don't want to have to go to 6 countries and like change my residency. Why can't there just be a nomad passport? Kind of like something the vision of Plumia might be
Yeah,
working on. But I also find there's a flip side where they're almost like, isn't tax annoying? And it's like, yeah, it is, but like as a grown up, you're not just gonna kind of wave. On the one hand, you're not just going to say like this is bad UX. Like people say the tax things are bad UX, and it's like, yeah, the countries don't care. They need their
mhm,
tax. Like they're not going to stop doing it because it's bad UX. They're not a private company that fixes their
yeah,
UX. Or if they do, they don't do it very quickly. And then the second side is like there's active libertarians that are saying my goal, their whole
right,
Twitter persona is, I am avoiding tax and I'm going and structuring like that, and I'll sell you a course on how to
yeah,
do that. And so all I'm saying is I'm not trying to criticize either of
right,
those two groups. I'm just saying maybe the kinds of people you're talking to when you say you're talking to 30 nations, you created the nomad visas. there's obviously something there that's working. And there are examples of nomad visas where they're saying you don't have to
Yeah,
pay tax. Come for a year, no tax, which is kind of shocking and
yeah,
interesting. But I'm just trying to think like, what's the next
yeah,
step? Are countries going to be competing in a race
yeah.
to the bottom to not tax people and bring them in? And how does that work?
Yes,
I
yeah,
love it. First of all, to be clear, I love it, but I'm thinking of sort of more like a policy
right.
person. Ooh, that could get
Yeah,
weird.
yeah, yeah.
Like
No, for sure. I have thought it through quite a bit. So, just to say the question at first, let me just answer the question you didn't ask, but I thought you were asking for a second, which is
sure,
like taxation by SafetyWing slash Plumia, right? And essentially, just to I know you didn't ask that, but I just wanted to answer that because that question sometimes comes up.
yeah. Like, will Plumia
Sure.
tax people?
And the answer is like, no, it will be more like it will be a product that costs a sum of money. In the end,
Hmm.
that's ultimately what it will be. And so even when you go to the most, let's say libertarian of the nomad subcultures, which is a conference called Nomad Capitalist that we were talking there, and
Yeah,
it's like everyone in that conference
yeah,
is like that. And they think Plymouth's fantastic. Like they're like, yeah, get on with it, right? It's like, how much it's going to be? And we're like, well, maybe this, maybe I don't know, $500. And they're like, great, when is it? When can I buy it? So it's like it appeals to
yeah.
this group, right? Because what they're trying to avoid is like being forced to pay for something they're not getting any value for that they don't want, right? It's not like that they're
Hmm.
against buying a product they think is cool, voluntarily.
Yeah.
So the voluntary aspect here just completely flips the switch, as far as how we appear to this kind of nomad subculture. Okay, and then, but then to the question you did ask. So, how will this dynamic evolve with the countries? And I think this is so crucial because I think it can go both ways. So there is a dystopian and a utopian possibility here, and we saw. I would say we saw this out of the gate, and this informed our strategy quite a bit, and how we thought about Plumia, which is that you've seen in other industries. Um where people either where the existing industry went into like fight mode or like trying to win mode, and which way they choose is very makes it very different how it is to be in that industry, right? So the kind of prime example of what you don't want is the music industry, where it started out with Napster, and then the whole industry just like went into the bunker and just sued everyone who started a music startup for a decade. And I know a couple of them.
Hmm.
And this was no fun if you were in the records either, which I also talked to them. Like they're just like in perpetual conflict, death and dread, right? All the time for like the entire 2000s. And then of course, Spotify comes and eventually this thing like blows over and now like the streaming is everything. But those 10 years were painful and could have been
Hmm.
avoided and also delayed the advent of like good streaming products by a lot. So okay, so that's and what we want to do is want to tilt the countries into the mode of like, oh, this is an opportunity, we want to succeed, because that's true. It's true that for the countries this does have two sides to it. It's not like there's, like we might get this person lost tax revenue. Yeah, that's possible, but it's also possible that you can attract like these like knowledge workers, high income, entrepreneurs to your country who don't compete for any of the existing jobs and just contribute positively to the economy like a tourist, right? And
Yeah.
so that logic is also true. So, and if we get them into that mode of like trying to win, trying to attract, then you get this like you can call it a race to the bottom, but I would say it's a lot much more positive race, right? Instead of like trying to ban and like make illegal, the kind of like country equivalent of suing anyone who tries, they can try to win. And that's, I think, the key victory of the nomad visa development is tilting the countries in this direction. They're trying to win and they're trying to get these people to come to their shores and making like huge policy concessions and work to do that. Um, so I think once you get that dynamic going, it tends to continue. So now I have a high confidence that this will tend to continue. That people they will just up the ante in trying to attract this sort of citizen and company to their shores. Okay, so that's roughly how I think. But if you kind of zoom to an emergent effect that you implied, like this change over time, the ability for entities to tax, I do think this is also the case. Yes, it doesn't happen in the short term, but in the long term, it does happen, and that's probably going to have to be an adjustment that the countries will have to make. Um, I'm not exactly sure how where it lands, but we've seen it in other industries that go global that this does happen. It happened with shipping in the beginning of the 1900s. Like suddenly at the same time, all the people who did shipping, they discovered at the same time that you could just have the company that owned the ship anywhere because you go between countries on the open ocean, and they sort of all
Mhm.
discovered that all at once. And then there was this rush to and that's where a lot of these offshore jurisdictions were created, was for this purpose. um, and so they would create their company there. And you had the way countries reacted to that was in a few different ways. You had a few countries like Norway and Greece who tried to win, and good on them, because they actually still were able to attract and have still a lot of that industry there. And then you had a lot of the other industries who tried to stop it by making it illegal. And of course, what they did is just drive out every single, part of that industry from their country completely. And they certainly weren't able to stop it. Like the only thing that could really stop is a ship going between two cities within that country. Um, so I think you'll have a similar dynamic here, when people are these kind of internet citizens, and the companies too, and they actually, if a country sucks, they could just move to another one, their company or their residence. You introduce competition, and that competition will reduce your ability, kind of the amount of fees you can charge, right? You kind of basically leave a monopoly situation and enter into a more competitive one. um, but it won't reduce it completely, right? So there will still be, the equivalent of the use case of going a ship between two cities in the same country. Like there will still be kind of areas that can be taxed because it's fully controlled within that country. It's just not going to be anything that happens on the internet. Basically, it's going to be separated.
Yeah, I like to tend towards the utopian vision in the sense that I think there will be a 10 or 20-year huge adjustment for, I'm Canadian, so I'm for like the universal healthcare that I had growing up. I think it should continue. I sound American, sound North American, but I like a lot of the stuff that Canada does. Um, there's a lot of people in the community that don't, though, and it's kind of like let's go move where we're treated best, and I get that too. I'm very sympathetic to that. But what I think is, let's call it the left leaning governments in terms of, if we want to fix problems, we can tax the rich more. I think the simple reality is, whether you're left wing, libertarian, or right wing, the governments that lean towards that idea of like we should tax the rich more are simply just going to have a problem of the rich can leave, and they always could do that, but it's like the bar has gone a lot lower. It's more like someone making $100,000 can leave and just get a digital nomad visa and switch to residency, where that was hard to do in even 2010. And so that's just
Yeah.
the reality. Whether you're left wing or right wing, they're going to have to adapt to this form of competition. And I almost feel like going back to classical liberal ideas, the idea that you compete by kind of forcing people to stay in your country because it's hard to get a visa. It's like, why am I not leaving Canada if I don't want to be here? It's 10 grand for the visa, and I might not get the visa, or leaving India for an H1B. It's almost like that. Those are unfair rules. Whereas capital can move around, boom, 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 like that with a wire transfer. Most people need years. 5 years ago, most people needed years of work and planning and possible rejection to switch their country. And so I think, I'm sure, as you believe in terms of what you've chosen to dedicate your life to right now, you agree, at least somewhat. But I think that the competition is good, and it will just be a forcing function like that. And so I'm sympathetic to the idea of countries getting hollowed out and governments that want to tax to support services feeling a flight. But it's kind of just the reality of the middle class. In the 30 years ago, there's a G7, or 6 countries that everybody wanted to move to. for the American dream or the equivalent in places like the UK and France and Australia. Lots of immigration in, and just having a level playing field where there's 50 or 70 countries that are saying, please come here. We're competing for your interest. I would say that it's going to be messy politically. This is just my prediction. Messy politically for 10 years, but we can get
Mm.
to a more utopian vision where we have better productivity and people are more free to sort themselves where they want to go. And so I think that not everyone will be happy, but we are working towards some kind of utopia.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think this moment in time is this great opportunity to create a bit more utopian social structure. And obviously, I'm dedicating my life to this because I do think that there's so much entropy on the internet in social structures, and people are a bit blind to it. And we need to create this new social structures very quickly. And I hope we can be that interface to this like internet world for the kind of the countries, and that they will seize the upside. Just to if there's anyone from a country listening, like there is a lot of upside here if you do it correctly. Like there are ways of taxing, for example, that still work for tourists, like VAT, right? Like consumption-based taxes
Hmm.
still are paid for by the equivalent of tourists. So if you can attract, nomad workers, remote companies, you get this like flourishing economy that it can still contribute to your taxable base. And what you want is actually to make yourself as attractive as possible for this new global workforce, and that can set up your economy for the 21st century in a great way. And if you're a citizen, just like realizing that this is the reality we're already living in. This is the economy is already global via the internet, the labor market, most product markets. But most people haven't realized it yet. So there's still so much opportunity from just being an early mover, and it's really needed.
Is there any particular country or group of countries that you feel has done the nomad visa or the remote work visa the best?
I kind of like, I don't know how almost everyone did it the same way, by the way, which is, there is some up and down, but it's like 50K. Yeah. Um, and a couple other things, but like not that much more. Like none of them did kind of or host country requirements, which like every other visa is like super rigid on.
Sorry, what is that? What is a host country requirement?
Like, for example, you might say like, oh, this visa, you can apply for this visa, but you can only apply if you're from these 74 countries.
I see. I got it.
That's a big difference. So that was the biggest mistake they can end up in. So frankly, I'm thrilled to have an income requirement. I mean, it's not like free, but it's like it's a fair limit that it's achievable if you get an online job. It's within the range of the possible. So I think it's actually a pretty great start. I wouldn't have, and most people implemented that version. There's a couple of like twists and turns, like curiosities, but in terms of like the base implementation, the people who did the 3 year or 5 year, ultimate unlimited renewable, which is the most common option, I think that's the right implementation. And thinking of the nomads logically a bit more like tourists than temporary residents in some sense. I think it's just a more like state of mind to approach it by, like to kind of understand the upside and the downside. It has more similar, yeah, they're not immigrants. Yeah, so I wouldn't point to them. The things that point up when I think about specific countries are the few that did like different things, but the mainstream thing is better than the exceptions.
Well, we're at the end of our hour, Sondre. It's been great having you on the podcast. Just maybe one last question. What are you most excited for in 2024? Whether it's something you're releasing or just a trend that you're seeing. What's exciting
Mm.
in next year?
We're working on two of the most exciting projects ever in SafetyWing. We're working on the kind of social safety net membership. Hopefully, we'll be able to launch it in 2024. It's our gargantuan undertaking. It's kind of what the company was founded to build, and we're this year we were able to get some of the key infrastructure in place to kind of work on our vision product. So that's that, and then we have the Nomad Border Pass in some iteration as well. So which is this thing we've been talking about. So two of the most exciting projects I've ever been working on. So that's it.
Great. Well, we'll look out for that, and we'll put information about you and about SafetyWing in the show notes, as you'd expect. And thanks again for taking this hour to jump on Remotely Serious.
Thanks, Curtis.